Thank you very much for having me and for showing up at 9:30 in the morning to hear me speak about vision, which is a big topic. I think we're going to have my presentation up on the screen in just a minute. Cool, yay. As Lucian mentioned, I'm Emily Greer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kongregate, and the topic of my talk today is keeping it real, creating, sharing, and executing a company vision. And this is going to be a lot about Kongregate's vision because that's the one that I know. I know that most of you guys are probably game developers, and so this is going to be a little bit different because we were building a platform, but I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about will be relevant in any case. And keeping it real, I'm going to talk about the thing that I know about. So this wasn't my idea for a topic. This is actually something that the speaker committee asked me to speak about. And I said yes because I'm on the IGDA board and I wanted to help. And then I was like, do I really want to talk about that? Is this something that I really have anything to say about that? And part of the reason why I think I had that feeling is because the idea of vision has sort of been intertwined with sort of arrogant tech bros starting companies and going on vision quests and things like that, or it's something like Steve Jobs thinking of I'm going to change the smartphone world, and I didn't feel like it had something necessarily to do with me, and it wasn't how I thought about myself and how we had gone along with it, but. I thought about it, and the more I thought about it, no, we really did have a vision for Kongregate when we started it, and that was actually really crucial, both to doing it, to convincing other people to give us money for it, and helped us shape our path along the way. And I got over it and found that I did have something to say. And part of what I want to say is that I think that vision is not the same thing as a vision statement. Lots of, Microsoft or big other companies will put a lot of work into crafting, a 50 or 70 word statement about what their vision is. And then you read it and it feels like a jumble of words and that don't mean that much. But that's not what vision is. I like this quote from Jonathan Swift of Gulliver's Travel fame, which is that vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. And that could be anything. It could be what a game could be. It could be what players are going to like or dislike. It could be how the industry is going to change or how you could change the industry. It ranges from small to large, but it's the things that both are occurring that other people aren't seeing and also the things that could be. And that's one of the things that's most important. So creating a vision. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk a lot about Kongregate and how we came up with our business. And we have kind of an interesting business overall, which you'll hear a lot of detail about. And the vision for it came from seeing some things that are invisible. But what you see, let's see. Oops, I went. I'm having some trouble here. Okay. Apologies. So vision is about seeing the invisible, but what and how we see, both in the moment and the invisible, is rooted in our experience. We have a frame, we have a point of view, and so any vision you come up with is going to be rooted in that, and anything we've done or we did is rooted in that. So going back to the earliest origins of Kongregate is actually here in Austin, where me and my brother, Christmas picture, where I think I'd given him some games, go back to, so we grew up mostly here in Austin, played a lot of games together, spent a lot of time on arcades, on the drag, and that is the core founding team of Kongregate. One of the sort of earliest signs of Kongregate coming was on a family trip to Ireland in, this is kind of slow, in 1983, I think, and we were in Ireland for 3 weeks, and my brother had me trapped in the backseat of the car. I was a saver and really saved up my allowance for whatever I wanted to buy, and he was a spendthrift and spent a lot of time in hobby shops buying D&D figurines, etc. And he had me trapped in the back seat of a car and spent the entire time convincing me that Ultima 3 was going to be the best game ever and that we needed to go halvesies. So that was his first real great sales pitch. That was me acting as finance minister. I was probably hiding from him in the trunk of that car at that moment, but he was right. He could see that this was going to be one of the greatest games that had been made up to that point, and I had the money, and we bought it. And that ended up being very significant because about, I'm not quite sure how many years later, when he was, after his freshman year of college, a friend of his from junior high was working at Origin, got him a QA job for the summer, and my brother ended up dropping out of college and becoming a programmer on Ultima 7, and even ended up being an NPC in that game, which is how either of the Greers are in games at all, and a very Austin story. So he went back to college and finished up, and then came back to Origin and worked briefly on Ultima Online prototyping. And then with a bunch of other Origin vets, started a small studio here in Austin called Titanic Entertainment. And this is around 1995, I think. They decided they wanted to do a real-time strategy game, and with a lot of online play, a very innovative game that became NetStorm, Islands at War. And this was published by Activision and came out in holiday 1997. And it's a very interesting game. It was very, very well reviewed, and it was later named by CNET the #1 game of all time that nobody bought. It sold less than 10,000 copies for a lot of reasons. One of the big ones being that Activision had lost faith in the project about halfway through, and then it became fun again at the end, but they'd already decided that they weren't going to do the marketing that they'd committed to, and they were going to put all their money behind this other strategy series that was coming out called Command and Conquer, and that, of course, that did very well for them, but NetStorm just got kind of dropped, left, forgotten about. And that left the Titanic team in a bind, and maybe they shouldn't have named the company Titanic. Maybe the future was written from the moment they did that. Their tagline was also "serving drinks till the ship sinks." So that was about 2.5 years. But the problem that they hit was, they'd made this great game that they were passionate about, and that there was a tremendous amount of online enthusiasm about. But Activision held the rights because that's the way that funding worked in those days, and Activision wouldn't fund the sequel or release the rights, and they just didn't feel that they had it in them to start new from a new franchise, raise new publishing, etc. And so they ended up just folding up the store, or whatever the right analogy is, and giving up and going off in their various ways. It was a bonus for me because it meant my brother ended up moving out to San Francisco Bay Area, where I was already living, and started working in web games, browser games, taking that experience with him. And so 8 years later, my brother, that's him, was working at EA, again, because Origin had been owned by EA, but he was working for Pogo.com. He was the technical director there. If you're not familiar with Pogo, it's a fascinating place built up in the kind of late 90s, 2000, a huge subscription-based business around games like Pop It Here, some bingo games, solitaire games, etc. About 250 games with live chat next to every game, and a community that was extremely avid about collecting achievements. So much so that my brother would tell me tales that their servers crashed almost every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. PST, because that was when they were releasing their new badges, and the entire community of 50-something Midwest moms would come in right then to be the first people to get to the achievements. So it was this sort of revelation to him and really interesting to me about how powerful that was and how powerful it was sort of beyond the demographics that we always assumed it was. But he was not that excited about making card games and trivia games, and so and he had the entrepreneurial itch. So he started with some of his coworkers from Pogo. Let's see, is it gonna come up? Yep. To start prototyping games around making and see if they wanted to go off and co-found a studio the way he'd done before with Titanic. So Kyle, Ron, and Ben were all working at Pogo with him, and they'd gotten some prototypes that they liked, and were getting there. But Jim was going to be the CEO and was thinking through all the business and distribution possibilities, and he was really worried, and he was really influenced by his previous sort of traumatic experience with NetStorm and Activision. So this was back in 2006, and distribution was still very largely through retail and controlled by publishers. In the casual space, you were starting to see a little bit of the try and buy $15 games that PopCap revolutionized. Steam was starting around then. I think the first third-party games started appearing on Steam back in 2005, 2006, but it was a very, very small business, and it was still very much you pitch your game to big publishers to get the money to make them. They keep the rights, and you lose all control. So he was really worried about founding a studio into that environment. And he started thinking about a lot of the things that were going on then, and Pogo and other things, and came up with a different idea. And that is the initial vision of Kongregate, which was to take YouTube's open distribution model that had just come out in 2005. We were just starting to see that, and the idea that sort of anybody could upload and distribute was a new thing. But combine that with the type of community that had been built on Pogo with chat and achievements, that would be something really powerful. And to do that with really developer-friendly terms, where all ad revenue was shared, all revenue was shared, we don't take any rights, and you just have direct access to the consumer. Now, this is all very, very natural these days, but back in 2006, this was pretty different and pretty unusual. In some ways, it was similar to something, a place called Newgrounds, if you're familiar with that. But Newgrounds was not very famous outside of the Flash game world at that time, so it actually wasn't an influence. We found it later, and we're like, oh, that's exactly a lot of what we're looking for. Only there's no revenue, and there's no money for the developers. So that was one of the things that we were adding. So you'll notice that all of those things that we're adding together was, ideas from Pogo and ideas from YouTube and yet ideas from other places. Most visions are like recipes, where you start with one recipe and you adapt it and you mix different ingredients together in a different way, and sometimes you come up with something that's just a little bit better or a little bit different than what you've done before. But sometimes if you change the techniques or bring things, really disparate things together, then you see something that's really new. And most visions are like that, and you should expect that you're going to be inspired by the things that you see and the things that you're familiar with. So, let's see, next. Cool. Yes. Cool. So one thing with vision is that there are some crucial questions to answer early. And they're really crucial because they both can sometimes dictate what the vision should be, and sometimes the vision dictates the answers. But you need to answer them to have a sense of whether something can work holistically. So one of the questions is, how do you want to make money? How are you gonna earn revenue with this? And the other is, how are you going to fund it? And because those two things create very different paths. So, for example, if you really, really don't want to do a free-to-play game, then you probably, and you really want to do a premium game, then you're saying, this is probably going to be a PC game. If you want to do free-to-play, then maybe you're probably saying this is a mobile game, for example. In our case, we thought sort of free games were going to be the future of the industry, particularly free-to-play games, and so that dictated that we were looking at something where we wanted a lot of audience, because for those types of things, you need a significant audience to make money. How you fund it is also a really important question. So for us, that partly came out of the scope of what we were trying to build. If Jim had gone ahead and started a game studio, he was going to bootstrap it. But building a platform, a lot of the ideas that was going to take more manpower, more time, more investment, and that meant definitely getting external investment. But it also made getting external investment easier because, again, the scope was bigger. But that also says once you're taking investment that you need to make a lot more money in the end, because ultimately investors are gonna want to get paid back, and also the kind of potential future is determined by taking investment. If an investor is always going to want their money back. So you're saying, I'm willing to sell this company at some point. In a successful situation, I'm going to, IPO, or I'm going to sell to Activision or whoever it would be. And that's something that's important to think through. Is that a future that I want? And that should help dictate the kind of choices that you make and how you bring your vision together. So in our cases, free to play, and investors. So Jim had the vision and was ready to get started, but now he had to share it and convince other people. So it started really with, you could say it started with me. You could also say it started with his now wife and girlfriend, who said, you can quit your job if Emily says it's a good idea. They had just moved in together, and she hadn't seen him in like an entrepreneurial, enthusiastic craze. So she's like, call Emily. She says it's okay, because she knew that my role was to be, the kind of skeptic, and I was going to be the person most likely to tell him that he was completely wrong and an idiot, because siblings. Anyway, so he called me. I think it was like 7:30 in the morning before work, and talked me through it. And I was like, actually, yeah, that's a good idea. Go ahead, I think you should do it. And then he walked into EA and gave his notice that day, and they escorted him from the building. So it was a really fast turnaround from me saying yes to Kongregate existing. And to abstract back, what makes a good pitch? What are key ingredients to convince somebody of your vision? So the first thing, and you can never say this enough, is that you want to tell a human story. You may have the most beautiful spreadsheet in the world, but we all connect to emotion. We all connect to arcs, and the way to bring a vision together for somebody else is to put it in a story form. I had seen that was very easy in this case, because Jim was telling me the story of the problems that developers have with distribution, and I had seen him go through that in a very painful way for multiple years previously. So that story immediately connected to me. And that's partly because, and then his ideas for how to bring it together were very powerful to me because they were grounded in familiar touch points. I'd been hearing him talk about Pogo and played on there myself. I just started watching videos on YouTube and seeing terrible car crashes and silly pet stuff and seeing the power of how that was spreading and really believe in the story of helping developers succeed and making that easier. So it was very sort of a shortcut and powerful to me. Let's see, what was my thing? He also needed to show the opportunity and thinking there he was showing the opportunity both in terms of the number of games and the number of developers out there who were just coming up through Flash, which was making it much easier to build a game, and then also talking about sort of the opportunity in free-to-play, which was just becoming a really big thing in Asia, but really hadn't taken off in any meaningful way in the West. And then he kept it simple. I don't know how long the call was, but I remember that I was standing in the Muni underground station in San Francisco, and it was maybe 10 or 15 minutes, if that, probably more like 10 minutes. And so he was able to condense it down and keep it simple, hit a few points, and then have a Q&A, and it was really powerful. And in general, you don't want to pitch that, if you need an hour to pitch somebody, then it's not simple. You want something that you can distill down to a much smaller amount of time. So a pitch has two hurdles. One is, the first one, which is the lower one in most cases, is to get somebody to see what you're seeing, to see your vision. And Jim had cleared that with me. The second one is, though, and this is whether you're asking somebody to work on it, somebody to give you money, anything, you have to convince them to see what you see and do it, participate in it, fund it to the exclusion of something else. Nearly always, it's not zero sum. You're having to not do something else in order to do this. And that second hurdle is often the higher one. Jim wasn't intending to clear that with me. He was just getting my okay and my feedback. But as time went, over the next 2 weeks, I was helping him with his business plan and was like, I'm kind of bored with my job in catalog and e-commerce. Jim, do you want a co-founder? And ended up about 3 weeks later quitting my own job and jumping in and have never regretted that, though starting a company with your brother does mean that you want to kill each other at least several times a year. But that second bar, remembering back, he was about to start a studio with a bunch of guys from Pogo. And Kyle and Ron, he pitched them. He said, I want to do this now. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. That's a great idea. But we want to make games. So we don't want to come join Kongregate. And that turned into a split where instead of founding one game studio, we founded two companies and then ended up renting an apartment, and Kyle lived in the back, and we all used the living room as our office for the first year, and that was actually great and the right decision for them. So Ron and Kyle ended up making the game World of Goo, which is a puzzle classic and one of the really great early indie success stories. And like us, they really believed in making it easier for developers to succeed. So they, at the time that World of Goo came out, they ended up co-founding Indie Fund with several other people. They didn't end up going on to make games together, but between the two of them with other people have made a lot of really great games. And that's one of the things that I want to convey is that just because somebody doesn't share your vision as something that they want to do doesn't mean that either of you are wrong. They had a vision of what they wanted for their lives and for what they were going to build, and that was absolutely right. And we had one for us, and that was absolutely right. And the good thing is that we figured it out before anybody started the studio together and had things be uncomfortable. So we both built great things, and we're all great friends. And and then the fourth guy, Ben Vinson, stayed at EA for a little while and then joined us at Kongregate, where he's still our principal engineer. So, I talked about how Jim pitched me, and that was a great pitch for me in the underground subway station in San Francisco. But you do need to have different pitches for different folks. Every pitch needs to be sincere and grounded in the vision, but it needs to be tailored and targeted to match whatever the recipient's interests are and what is familiar to them. So when we went to look for investment, and were able to get investment, we got an angel round led by Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn. We got a venture round of Greylock, and then very randomly, Jeff Bezos decided to call up Reid and say, I'd like to invest in Kongregate, so we weren't going to say no. In total, we ended up raising about $9 million. Dollars, and it was a relatively easy time to fund, and people were interested in platforms and games. But it took a good pitch, and it was not the same pitch that Jim made to me. But most of the key ingredients were still the same. We started off talking to, first one investor and another investor, and we went through probably 30 different investors, kind of going up the food chain, going through our pitch, and you can feel a room whether they're responding or not. And the point when people started responding to the pitch was when Jim had figured out what human story to tell. And it was a story around how he felt about playing World of Warcraft and what drove him and motivated him as a player. So for me, I was motivated in the pitch by hearing about independent developers, because my brother had been a developer. I had a lot of friends who were independent developers. I wanted them to succeed. For the investors, they needed to hear a story about players. They needed to hear a story about customers and why they would be interested and motivated by what we were putting together. Then, let's see, what was the thing? And then we needed to ground it with touch points that were familiar to them. So YouTube was no problem. We could talk about YouTube. They were all excited about YouTube. It was around the time that Google bought YouTube, so that was no problem. But Pogo was just not something that was familiar to anybody. Unless you were a Midwestern mom, it wasn't something that was on your radar. So when we talked about community and achievements, we talked about Xbox Live and things like that they were much more likely to at least have heard of and hopefully have played, even though Pogo and the way Pogo worked was much more our model. And then it was really, when you're talking to investors, we're there to ask for money, and they're there for return. So the heart of it had to be showing the opportunity and where we could get to and how big it could be. And so that was much more about the opportunity. I was in it for mostly different reasons. So I needed to see that there was an opportunity there, but the investors needed to see that was the core of what they needed to believe in and what we needed to show, which miraculously we did. We did keep it simple in general. That is still always the best policy. If your pitch deck is 30 pages, then it's probably too long. You want to, anytime you think you've got it, you want to take a page out, you want to take a page out. And then finally, we needed to sell ourselves as well, because ultimately an investor is taking a chance on your vision, but even more, they're taking a chance on your ability to execute it. And if that initial vision is wrong, come up with a new one. So it's 50%, 60% what you're presenting, and the rest is who you are. To be keeping it real, the selling of Jim went much better than the selling of me. Greylock at one point told me later that they had funded Jim and they considered me a negative on the deal. And they showed that by asking me to give up my board seat and my title. We compromised on I kept the board seat but gave up my COO title. But in the end, they said it was a really pleasant surprise. I turned out to be competent and smart. They were like, oh yeah, it's great that you're competent and smart. Yeah, I was always competent and smart. So, you know, if you look exactly like what they're expecting in an entrepreneur, that helps because they're pattern matching. I didn't look exactly what they were expecting. I was female, I was coming from e-commerce, I was coming from companies they'd never heard of, and so they had a hard time believing in me. And so if you're not what they're expecting, you're going to need to work a lot harder in terms of how to present yourself and how to sell yourself. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to give advice from what I've learned. But one of the pieces of advice I have is to have a rocking co-founder who believes in you, even if they don't. So we've raised money, we have this great vision. Now we need to build it, and that is a really, really daunting task. And the bigger your vision, the more scary and more overwhelming it is to start. And when you want to do everything, where do you begin? How do you start? So you need to break it down. You can't raise the whole world at once. You need to figure out what's really core. So for us, what we broke down was that with a platform like Kongregate, it was going to be a two-sided platform where there was going to be sort of circularly positive or negative reinforcing. If players would come for games, and developers would be more likely to put games on our platform if we had a lot of players. So we knew that we needed to have both sides be excited about what we were doing and motivated and want to work with us. So, but they don't want exactly the same thing. So on the developer side, we thought, what are developers motivated by? What do they care about? And broke it down to they want audience. They want people, first and foremost, they want people to play their game that they have spent so much time working on and have so much love for. So they want people to experience that. With that, very close first or second, they want revenue. They also, to a lesser degree, want feedback, like, is the game good? How is it working? And they want status because you want to feel important. And the lights are back on. Was I not moving enough?
I don't know.
So audience is looking for something a little different. They are looking, first and foremost, for entertainment, so games themselves, but they also care about progress, and they care about connection with other people, and that's where the ideas around community and metagame were coming in. And like developers, like everybody, they care about status. You like a big number next to your name, you like to feel important, you like to feel special. So those were kind of the key things that we were thinking, this is what we have to create in order to attract both of those things. But there's dependencies there. And so we sort of worked out, okay, what's dependent on this, what's dependent on that. For example, we knew we needed games before we could have players. So we needed to prioritize what developers needed before players. But to have revenue, we needed a lot of players, And one of the things that was motivating for developers was revenue. So there's this, sort of hard circular thing. But we worked it out and worked out a sequencing where, basic developer features had to come first, and then, because then we could upload our first games, but almost simultaneously, we needed to have basic player features because we needed to start attracting players. That also meant that once we had those things together, we had a good prototype. And that's when we were able to fundraise. As long as we had a pitch deck, we weren't getting money. The moment that we were able to show something, even a relatively limited alpha to investors, that was when we started to get yeses and we started to get term sheets. So can get funding in here. Then next, we started to get, open up and bring players in because that was the next step. And we wanted to keep those players, so we started focusing on the advanced player features, the things that were going to keep people. And then we got more games, and the positive cycle started to happen of more games, more players, and so we added ad revenue, and that started to be meaningful. And then, but then the final piece, we really believed in free-to-play, but we needed audience, so we left that last. We left our free-to-play platform last, and we also looked around and said, the Flash developers, the people who are building games for our platform, they're not making free-to-play games. They aren't looking to China and other places. So, and we need to show the opportunity to people before they'll start doing it independently, and they're not going to see that to begin with. So we decided, once we had the funding, to fund some individual developers to make free-to-play games, to show off the platform, and that had to start before we did the platform. So there was this whole, and we had this pretty much from the start, almost a 2-year plan of how we were gonna build things out based on the dependencies. And so when you're executing, we talked about the core principles of games developers and what do people want. You need to think through, what does everybody on the team know? Need to know and need to understand to be able to make independent decisions and bring everything together holistically. So that first slide with the games and audience and what developers and players want was a big part of it. But another thing that we felt that everybody needed to understand was, how do developers make decisions? And we saw it as an equation where, for a developer to do something, the size of the opportunity needs to be greater than the amount of effort and the amount of risk. So all through, we were making decisions based essentially on this equation. So one of the problems when we started up was, in terms of opportunity, there was no opportunity. We didn't have any audience. There wasn't any revenue. So what we did was we created weekly and monthly contests so that you would win contest prizes, even if there was no revenue, so that there would be something immediate and tangible for the best developers, along with a promise of future rev share. In terms of effort, we focused very much on having an easy, low-friction upload process, no required integration, so that you could put up a game almost as fast as you could put something up in YouTube, and that would make it an easy decision. And then on the other side, we didn't want to introduce any risk, and the more that you ask, the more that you restrict, that creates risk. So everything was non-exclusive, everything was developer-friendly terms, so that you could look at it and say, oh, this is an easy decision. And that's something that we've kept through, and this is pulled from an internal deck that I've been giving all along. This is something that we want everybody at Kongregate to understand, and is really crucial to how we make our business. So getting back to vision and executing vision, one of the things that's most important about having a strong vision is that it helps you decide what not to do. I've been talking up to this point about deciding what we would do, and that was driven by the vision. But what we didn't do, which is just as important, was driven by that as well. So 2007, the Facebook game platform, app platform came out, and by 2008, it was really starting to take off, with the net result that Greylock, our VC, put tremendous pressure on us to become Facebook game developers. Like every board meeting, David Z was in there just hammering at us. You need to make games for Facebook. You need to make games for Facebook. But we stood strong because even though obviously it was a great platform and a lot of developers were having a lot of success, that wasn't why we started. That wasn't what we were looking for. We weren't game developers. We were having traction, quite a lot of traction on Kongregate in terms of audience. Revenue wasn't there yet, but we felt that we were onto something, and so we were like, no, no, no. And we managed to say no enough times that Greylock moved on and invested in SGN instead, at which point they stopped pressuring us to make Facebook games because they had their bet in that arena, and then we got to keep on working on our platform, which was not the rocket ship ride that Facebook games turned out to be, but was steady and sustainable, and has been the much better long-term business, and for the record, the much better exit for Greylock. I'm not petty at all. So the other thing is vision helps you tell you when to keep going, because lots of things are not going to be successful when they start. And we believed so deeply in free-to-play that we didn't give up when what we did at first totally sucked and did not work. So here are some very tiny numbers showing the results of the initial games that we funded for the free-to-play platform. We launched it in November 2008, and I think we made $2,000 that month, and then maybe $2,000 the next month. The games were high-rated, they were popular, and they were made by good developers, so who've gone on to success. So this first one, called Remnants of Skystone, was made by a company called Flipline that had a lot of success with the Papa's franchise, which does well as a paid game on mobile. And then this game, Dino Wars, with a great art. The artist went on to work on Threes and a bunch of other games. So we had a good group, but we were funding free-to-play games when we had absolutely no idea how free-to-play really worked. I've done a different talk about that. And so we gave them terrible advice, and the games didn't do anything. Think about being us in a board meeting with Greylock after we refused to do Facebook games, and our free-to-play platform has come out, and we've made $18,000 on it in about 11 months. But we were like, no, we just haven't figured it out yet. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep getting different games, and we believe in this. And we were right. So September 2009, the first indie MMO got uploaded on Kongregate, and revenue started to take off, and that helped us go like, oh, this is what a free-to-play game that works looks like. So we then started going out and looking for other types of games that were more like that. We brought on our first Asian MMO, our first Facebook game, and things really started to climb and just kept going up from there. And then we got sort of the positive feedback loop of we're learning about free-to-play from the games on our platform. I go out and give talks. That attracts more free-to-play games to our platform, and we're also giving developers advice as they're uploading, because now we actually know what's going on. So, we stared failure straight in the face on this for a full year, really. But in the end, it became a really nice business, and helped us get that better exit than SGN. But that's inspiring success story. I can't tell you the number of things that were smaller parts of our vision that we tried and gave up on. And stopping doing things is just as important as continuing on. And you need to really look inside and say, how important is this? How crucial is this? How much do I believe in it? Some things that we gave up on, that we tried and gave up on. One was that initial free-to-play publishing that we were bad at, though that came back in a different form. We spent a lot of time, how YouTube videos are embeddable, trying to make embeddable games work, but that just didn't work. Facebook apps, I don't even know. So there was a lot of carving and cutting and saying, this isn't working the way we thought. This isn't working in some core principle. And you need to look in and say, and think about, why isn't this working, but why do I believe this other thing will? And I can't tell you exactly how but for me it's a really gut feeling about what people's motivations are and how they do things. So if you know much about Kongregate, you know that that our business right now doesn't look very much like the business that I just described here. And we've been around for 12 years, and the game industry has changed very, very much in that time. So I've been talking about 2008 a lot because it was a really pivotal year. It was also the year that the new iPhone came out, or maybe it was 2007, sometime around then. And gradually, while we were building up this nice browser business, the casual gaming world, the mobile gaming world was really, really changing. And mobile was becoming a bigger and bigger part of the industry. And we're like, okay, we need to be a part of that. So the first thing we did was Kongregate Arcade. And this released in January of 2011. And what we were doing was just basically taking lots of Kongregate features that were sticky and some Flashlight and HTML5 games and releasing them on Android because, iOS, they're never going to let us do this, but Android's open. They might let us do that. We were in the gray area of the terms, and we actually got kicked out by Google within 36 hours, but then we were able to prove that we weren't actually what they said, and we're able to come back. But it didn't work. Well, it worked in some ways, and it didn't work in other ways. We were able to get a lot of installs for it. We got more than 2 million installs just on Android, with absolutely the opposite of any featuring from Google. They were quite hostile. But between Kongregate and our channels and word of mouth, we got quite a lot of installs. The thing that we weren't able to get anything of was revenue. And then Flashlight was killed, and we didn't see what was coming. We didn't see how we could keep doing this, and so we sort of ended up shuttering it and moving on. And that was hard because we'd put quite a bit of investment in this, and it was, that was Kongregate on mobile. If we couldn't do Kongregate on mobile, what were we going to do? But it's not really very surprising though that it failed, because it wasn't really a vision for a product. What it was we were just copying what we'd done on browser and putting it in a totally different ecosystem without really thinking through, what's motivating developers, what's motivating players, how can we pull this together? And we even kind of knew that when we were greenlighting it. I remember being in that meeting and saying, I don't know how this will ever make money, but we'll learn a lot. And that ended up being very prophetic and almost exactly what would happen. But after that wasn't working, we took a step back and we're like, okay, we need to actually come up with a vision of how we can be on mobile and have that work. And to take that step back, we stepped back not to from our initial vision for Kongregate to what was our mission. and why we were doing something. Now, mission statements and missions is another thing that, like vision statements, has some sort of negative associations and very kind of thing that gets painted on a wall and doesn't necessarily have to do with people's business. But like vision, if you strip it back, it is really a meaningful thing. So vision is about where you want to go and how to do it. So it's the destination and it's the map. Mission is about why you want to go someplace at all. And with Kongregate, the reason why we started Kongregate was because we wanted to help improve the lives of independent developers and improve distribution, monetization, connect them to players. And when we took a step back, we could see you can do that on mobile, but it looks different. Google and Apple are the platforms. We can do it on mobile as a publisher. Now, that was a very radical conclusion for us to come to for a company that was founded out of basically hatred of Activision. To say, oh no, we can be a publisher, we should be a publisher, we can be the good guys. But we're like, we can drive traffic. We've proved that with Kongregate Arcade. And all of these things that are hard on web are still hard on mobile. Marketing, analytics, monetization, getting to be able to present your game to Google and Apple and get featuring, and we can help with that. So we started a mobile publishing division, and that is now the majority of our revenue by far. We've published more than 55 games, a lot of them developers and games that we first worked with on Kongregate.com. And then we're able to transition and help them bring those games to mobile. Adventure Capitalist, for example, is a great example of that. Bit Heroes, Animation Throwdown, et cetera. So, that was a case where we just needed to get back to the core of what we do, forget about exactly how we'd been doing it, but why, and then think of a new how and have a new vision. So, I talked before about, pitches having two hurdles. And when you're evolving a company and you're evolving a vision, that comes up again. So, as we transitioned to a company that was more about publishing than about platform, that came up for my brother. So, he absolutely believed in publishing and that this was the right thing for us to do on mobile. But he didn't really want to run a publishing business. Like, it wasn't that interesting to him. He liked building platforms, and he'd been in games 25 years and was getting a little bored. So we ended up having a conversation, and he decided that the best thing was for him to step down and go work on campaign finance reform, which is something he was really passionate about. And that's when I took over as CEO. As we were, and it's not been a completely simple thing because, having a platform and having a publishing arm has meant that we have two divisions that have slightly different visions, and they haven't always understood each other, and they haven't always understood their connection. And at one point we had a VP of mobile who was really pretty hostile to the platform and didn't understand how it connected and how they came together. And that was a very challenging thing. And it's something that may come up. Disagreement on execution and how you get there is something that is not only natural but necessary for a healthy business. But when you have a disagreement about the core vision of something, that's something that ultimately is a long-term problem, and one that is probably sort of irreconcilable. If you have leadership that doesn't all agree on the vision, then you're not going to be successful. And so in this case, it ended up with a discussion and that VP leaving because in the end, we needed someone who was on board and understood how these businesses work together and how they still work together. And to keep going, we transitioned to a publishing business back in 2013, but we still have our platform. But one of the things that sort of looking at our mission and looking at what is important to us, a couple years ago we came to the conclusion that we wanted to build a new platform, that browser games and free-to-play games was great, but only a small percentage of the indie developer market at this point is developing for those platforms. And if we are living up to our vision and our mission, then we should expand to include premium games, native games, and the broad ecosystem of PC. So earlier this year, we announced Cartridge, which is going to be a new PC platform. We started publishing premium games on console. Speed Brawl is coming out next week on consoles and Steam. And so we've made this big investment into the PC indie premium space. And that is very much matching our mission and our vision. I have absolutely no idea if it's a good business decision. The let's take on Steam still feels to me like a little bit of a crazy thing, but we're still driven to do it because we think it is the right thing for us and the right thing for the industry, and we may just totally fail, and that'll be okay. So notice we're doing a lot of things, and growing a vision is a big part of executing it. So, when you start off as a small team, you're all running together in the same direction. You can run pretty fast, and you all know where you're going. But over time, as you do more, and there's more and more people in your organization, that becomes hard, and that's something that you have to grapple with and think, how do I communicate a vision? How does vision work in a much bigger company? So, when Kongregate started, we were 8 people, and now we are around 125. So this is a restaurant seating chart showing about that number of people. And I find that for me to think about communication, visualizing how many people can sit at a table and have one conversation is a good sort of mental arranger of how communication works. If you can, 10 people can have a conversation at a table, 12 it starts to stretch, and every time we go in a multiple of 12, communication gets a little bit harder. And so think about a company as having this kind of number of separate conversations. So how do you do it? And how do you keep an organization aligned when you have a lot of people? So one of the things is that you always have to be pitching. You have to be reiterating what your vision is and talking about it all the time. It's also really important to not take any knowledge for granted in a big organization. You get to the point where you feel like everything's taken for granted. This is, of course you know this, of course I know that. But the more you have new people, the longer people have been there, they don't remember, they never knew, and you need to repeat and repeat. And it's easy to start to feel like you're crazy because you're just saying the same thing again and again to a lot of people. But that is, if you're doing a good job, you're saying the same things again and again. It is also important to talk to smaller groups. We do regular company stand-ups where we're talking to all 125 people, but you don't really know how focused people are in those situations, and people are rarely comfortable asking questions or pushing back in that kind of environment. So I really like to break it up into smaller groups to talk. I also like it for another reason, which is that it allows you to tailor your conversation. How I talk about budget and opportunity is going to be different with the mobile UA team than it might be with the cartridge content team. And just repeat, keep it simple, tailor to your audience, and say the same things again and again, and never stop pitching. The other thing it's good to do is to make sure that you're articulating the things that you might take for granted. So Kongregate had a mission for almost all of its history, but we didn't articulate it. We just sort of lived it. But as part of our 10-year anniversary, when we had gotten to about 75, 80 people, we realized that that wasn't enough anymore, that some things you need to say and things that you need to articulate more concretely once you've gotten to a certain size. So as part of our 10-year anniversary, we split the company up into groups and asked them to come up with a mission. And one of the things that made me really happy was that they all fundamentally came up with the same words and the things that was true, which is we're here to help developers and build player communities. And the other thing that we did is we set a 20-year goal, this really big, hairy, audacious goal of what we want to be, which is to be a household name in gaming, universally known for excellence and integrity. And that is another tool to help us guide our decision making as we are evolving our vision, as we're growing, to just think about what we want to be. So we keep doing more and more, and there's both more people is one direction of complications. The other is how much you're working on. And we are working on a lot of things. We've bought a couple companies. There's a lot going on. And this means that a lot of times it feels a little bit like this, where everything is traffic going in different patterns and getting in each other's way. And I'd like to tell you that I can give you this great advice about how to manage with it, but we're really in the trenches on figuring out this problem. All I can do is talk about some things that are helping us right now. So we have recently gone through a reorg where we're concentrated into individual teams or programs led by program managers, and it's a little bit more actually like game development and game teams, and that's helping a lot. But other things that are helping are saying no more, and making sure teams have a clear focus and vision. Let's see, get this through. Okay, we're pushing decision-making down, making sure that it's not all being bottlenecked up at the leadership level, that leadership's role is really to focus on coordinating and these groups and how they are working together, and minimizing shared resources, because people switching back and forth has a lot of cost and makes it harder to have one sort of singular vision for those individual programs. Get to the next. Cool. So that's about it. One of the core things that I just want to say about vision is that it really has to be true and honest. It can't be just something that is a statement that is written down and doesn't mean anything to anybody and isn't what you do. It only works if what you say you believe in, what you're trying for, is what you're really going for. If you're focused completely on survival and you're making your choices based on survival, then be honest about that and follow that, because that will come through. But the best thing is to go look inside with your founders, with your other leaders, and say, this is why we're here, this is what we want to do, and use that to guide decision making. So the first step to greatness is honesty, according to Samuel Johnson, or possibly a proverb. The internet was unclear as to the provenance of this, but I think it is a sort of a key maxim to hold with you, that everything is more meaningful and more powerful when it's honest and when it's true. So thank you. That's it. And you can ask me anything.